Shalom from Jerusalem. This is Powers in Play, our monthly show focusing on global affairs. And this time, the power of the person. Obviously, there is now a single superpower, United States, with two close behind, China, and perhaps further behind, Russia. But the presidents of China and Russia seem to be superpowers in their own capitals, while the US president is not so powerful. Obviously, he has Congress to contend with and elections coming up in November of next year. So the question is the election, which right now seems to be a rematch between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, is that going to affect policy? Is that going to change materially what happens in global affairs? Or, to put it another way, different or indifferent? And with us, our distinguished panel, all very honorable, with long resumes, which need not be repeated here. Eran Etzion, formerly of the National Security Staff in Israel, retired Brigadier General Doron Gavish, formerly the Air Defense Chief in the Israeli Air Force, Ambassador Daniel Ayalon, formerly Ambassador to Washington and Deputy Foreign Minister, and Reserve Colonel Reuven Ben Shalom, formerly of the Israeli Air Force, and several other clandestine occupations no one knows about. So, Eran, if you have to consider all events, all personality traits, the political scene in which next year, of course, there is also the congressional cycle, presuming that Donald Trump comes back into the White House 2 years short of his 80th birthday, and Joe Biden leaves the White House 2 years after his 80th birthday. Is the world going to feel the change?
That's a nice way of framing it. I have to say first that in your overall description of the so-called powers in play, you started out by saying that obviously there is just one superpower, it's the US, with China and Russia following it. I don't subscribe to this old view, with your permission. I think the only peer competitor that the US has, and will continue to have throughout the century as much as we can forecast, is China. Russia is on a totally different league, if you will.
Can we consider Russia a super spoiler?
Yes, but it's certainly not on par with the other two. And definitely China is now a peer competitor. The old prophecies made in the Pentagon decades ago are now being fulfilled. And when you try to really calculate, estimate the actual power, and of course there's a big question, we can spend a whole panel about how do you define power and so on. Chinese power and American power are now absolutely peer competitors, and in some important measures, China already supersedes the US. So that's in terms of the overall playing field. In terms of the race between Trump and Biden, absolutely, if Trump gains access to the White House once again, the world will definitely feel a tremendous change. Much like, I'm tempted to say, much like the change that we all felt when he first entered the White House. It's a fascinating question to try and ponder what will be the actual changes in his policies, in his behavior, in his close circle between a first Trump term and a second Trump term, in and of itself, regardless of Biden. But if you want to compare a Biden presidency, second presidency, and a Trump second presidency, I think there will be very considerable differences. You know, we can look at kind of file by file, beginning with Russia, Ukraine. One of the first things Trump is going to do is reverse U.S. policy on Russia in a comprehensive way, and specifically on Russia, Ukraine. NATO is going to feel the heat. It's all going to be extremely different. And that's just one case. So I'll stop here. I could go on.
Danny, you've been posted to Washington during the George W. Bush term, obviously a Republican president who took over from a Democratic one, Clinton, and during his first year, before you were there, 9/11 took place. Did you feel that there is a general consensus, a bipartisan consensus, and it didn't really matter whether it was Bush or theoretically Al Gore?
Well, probably yes. I would say that Bush was actually fairly a moderate Republican. Clinton was a moderate Democrat. So there wasn't a real big gap in terms of policy, in terms of worldview between the two. So there was a continuity. Was a continuity, with the Bush policy, even vis-a-vis the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. They continued with the two-state solution, and actually they did try to achieve what Clinton could not achieve in 2000, Camp David. But I do totally agree with Iran. Personalities matter. There is an history-old question: do the leaders make the history, or do they just respond to realities? And I do believe that certainly in the last century or so, we see that the leaders make the difference. Without Hitler, there wouldn't be a World War II. With Churchill instead of Chamberlain at the time in '38, maybe there wouldn't be also a World War II. And Trump makes a difference. He will definitely focus on China. He is the one who started like 6 years ago actually to really respond to the Chinese aggression, whether it was vis-a-vis the yuan's, the devaluation of the Chinese currency as they were inundating the world, certainly with their aggression in the South Chinese Sea. So here we will see a further I would say, tough American policy vis-a-vis China.
Does that mean that his efforts to get on Putin's good side were intended to have Russia as an ally against China?
Probably he would. There could be also, and I don't want to go into it because there are a lot of theories here, including all kinds of nefarious ones. That he has some personal interest.
This is a show for the entire family. You don't have to go into the dossier.
There could have been some personal interest of Trump vis-a-vis Putin, but yes, as a worldview, or maybe again he rationalized it in hindsight, but he really saw Russia as part of, let's say, the Western Caucasian, I would say, culture against the Chinese in the East. So certainly, I think the ones that will lose will be Ukraine and NATO, and there is going to be an increased, I would say, a Cold War between the U.S. and China.
Reuven, you've been in touch with your American colleagues, opposite numbers, throughout the years. We have seen recently, because this is the third year in Biden's first and, who knows, only term, that the exodus from the administration has started. And in recent days, the next level down from the cabinet secretaries of the Departments of State and Defense has also announced the departure. Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, and the other Secretary of Defense for Policy, Colin Kahl, among others. From your experience, does it matter whether specific personnel are the ones through whom the presidential guidance is filtered?
I think this connects to what we've been discussing now. Do personalities matter? And it's yes and no, like we just discussed here. Also, I think this change is not something that's unique to this circumstance now. We've always seen that. Look at Trump's presidency with national security advisors coming and going.
One of whom, at least, John Bolton, is now warning the American people not to re-elect Trump because he is unfit for office.
Mm-hmm. But this also shows the dynamics of politics and an administration. That's it's part of it. You talked about my colleagues, so remember my colleagues were mostly military, and that is that's firewalled theoretically from the political realm. But this also shows that for military personnel, looking up, what do they have? The national security strategy, where theoretically has to do with who's the president, right? You would expect the national security strategy of Trump and Biden to be totally different. So, of course, they're worded differently. And even some things that are written on the ground, bottom line, what do you have? You have reality, right? So I think Trump and Biden could use different terminology to refer to Russia and China, right? Is it rivals, peer rivals? Are they just the bad guys? But bottom line, we understand where the challenges are. So I don't see anything unique with this changeover now. And I also think that in general, the reality is such where we're not going to see a totally different action by this president or that president, even though, of course, Trump will come in and he'll move the American embassy to Jerusalem and he'll recognize the Golan Heights. So even on our little field here, different presidents can do dramatic things that the other wouldn't even dream of doing. Yet the other will come into office and he won't reverse them because these are sensitive issues.
Doron, you have engaged with general and flag officers. And what we saw over the last 6-7 years is that for the first time since the very early 50s, two general officers, retired four-star generals, first Mattis and now Austin, have served as secretaries of defense. As far as you know, when they, rather than their civilian colleagues, occupy the office of the Secretary of Defense, does it matter to the officers who are still serving?
Well, I think it does, because they feel there is someone in office that understands them, that comes from the, from their environment. So for the officers, for sure, it is something which is important, that the one that is serving in this position is one of them. Let's call it this way. But I would like to echo what was said by Reuven here, that the military, the guys that we are working with, they are, and I like the term firewall from the politician. I mean, you really see it. And I think, in general, I also agree with this statement that the U.S. grant strategy overall stayed plus minus the...
But you'd rather use the term firewall than Chinese will.
Well, yeah.
The Great Wall of China.
I agree. And but then again, we could give another good example that when Trump administration was in charge, we shifted after so many years from EUCOM to CENTCOM. So again, a decision which is, for Israel point of view, of course, it's a very important one, but this is something that was done very quick. And it is a strategic decision, so... Yeah, people change. People make a lot of change, and we saw with the Trump administration a big shift on this.
Eran, there are different cycles, different clocks in operation. Congress, the House of Representatives, every 2 years has to be reelected. The representatives go on their fundraisers immediately upon being elected. Senators every 6 years, presidents every 4 years, but acquisition cycles and other parts of what the military does, recruitment, retention, they all march to different drummers. From your point of view, first at the Foreign Affairs Ministry and then the National Security Staff, how do you reconcile, looking from Jerusalem at Washington, how do you reconcile all of these different cycles?
From an Israeli perspective, actually that's the one constant in Israeli-US relations that we can rely on. We will have those different clocks no matter what. So the whole system is synchronized, and that's not going to be any different under any administration. But if we are trying to kind of look onto a potential either Trump or a Biden second term and compare the two, I actually, again, don't necessarily agree to what Doron was saying in terms of the so-called harmony or equality of the grand strategy regardless of the administration. I think there's going to the differences between and we can say a Republican presidency, because DeSantis, I think, on these issues, or anybody else that has a real chance, are not going to be different from Trump on the global perspective, global issues, foreign policy.
Isolationist?
Yes, that's where I'm getting. But it's not only that. It goes also beyond the dimension of interests and realpolitik into the realm of values and value-based approach or strategy or grand strategy. And here I think the difference between the Republican and Democratic side has never been that stark. And we're going to feel it again, regardless of the actual personality that takes the seat. There's going to be a stark difference between a Democratic administration and a Republican administration in the next cycle. And I want to put it as simply as possible at the risk of sounding simplistic. A Democratic administration is going to be much more of a globalist, aggressively pro-democratic, and a Republican administration is going to be much more of an isolationist and pro-authoritarianism. And that's going to make a world of difference across all policy files and across all domains. Russia is obviously a prominent example, so is China. But it's not only that, and it will also impact Israel-US relations.
Doron, the current MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding, which promised Israel $38 billion over 10 years, will come to its end during the second term of either of these two gentlemen. Down the road, do you see the American commitment, not only the rhetorical one? We always hear about the ironclad, but and we have the Iron Dome. Nevertheless, things change, public opinion changes. Do you see Israel still relying on such orders of magnitude of military aid? Because it's not really dollar-wise. It's what you get when you go to the Lockheed Martin plant and buy F-16s or F-35s. Do you see Israel still able to factor in such amounts of aid later in the decade and on into the 2030s?
Well, I think for sure this is something that Israel, from the Israel point of view, have to take in concern that this is something that could change in the future, and we can't say that this is something that will be there for decades and decades. But we also have to remember that this aid is what is called an FMS aid, which at the end of the day...
Foreign military sales, so now foreign military funds, FMF.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we have to remember that it helps the U.S. industry, because those are funds that with those funds you buy, but only U.S.
Yeah, we are very generous in agreeing to receive it.
I think that there is also a U.S. interest here. It's not only the Israeli interest that are playing here, but for sure this is something that it's significant for Israel, for our defense quality, for our military overall. And so, yeah, this is something that we must take in concern, that one day it might change. But I'm not sure that it would be changed, as I said, so fast, because there is also a big American interest.
But, you know, Reuven, building up on what Doron just said, if you look at Ukraine, where the U.S. has already invested 10 times in 1 year, 10 times the amount of this decade-long support for Israel. Does it mean that the Israeli aid is marginal and can be spared? Or does it show the real standards of American interest, that whatever happens in Europe vis-a-vis Russia is so much more important than what happens in the Middle East and to Israel?
I don't think we can compare these two cases at all. Israel is strategically aligned with the United States, and beyond money, for the United States, we are an asset. Now, I know this isn't the topic of today, but the United States gains a lot from the cooperation, from our mutual learning, the technology we evolve together. Intelligence is a huge asset for the United States, and I don't think we discussed that a lot, maybe for obvious reasons. So for the United States, this is a huge investment in U.S. interests in the region. Ukraine, I think, is a totally different calculation. Also depends what side of the aisle you are in the States, because we talked about nefarious We can take it into that direction, business considerations in Ukraine, the whole issue of NATO. I don't think we can speak the same language. As for Israel, I seriously am not concerned. I've seen previous administrations, like even the Obama administration, that many Israelis will say, oh, Obama is against Israel. No, he's not. Against U.S. policy is very clear on Israel because we are such an asset. So during the Obama administration, the investment in Israel was never greater. During, by the way, the Biden administration, I think the package given, he bragged about this, right, was never greater, and it will always be like this, at least in the foreseeable future. I don't think there's any difference between this president. We're not getting handouts, this strategic alliance, especially all the things that the United States is facing now, and you can even see CENTCOM. CENTCOM are our good friends, right, not only because they like us personally and we get along great, it's because we are a strategic partner for CENTCOM. So I don't see this changing.
Danny, when you left the Foreign Service and went into politics, you became Deputy Foreign Minister. This is during the Obama-Biden, Hillary Clinton administration. Did you feel any change over from the Bush era?
Not really in substance, but somewhat in style, I would say. As far as the defense cooperation, it went, full steam ahead. Just as Reuven mentioned, it's the interest here that speak. It's almost a seamless defense cooperation, military cooperation between the two allies. I would say Israel and the United States are natural allies on many, many respects. By the way, on top of what Reuven mentioned, the United States' interest now maybe to concentrate on the Far East and basically leave somewhat the Middle East can only be based on the fact that they have here the backing of Israel to really keep stability in the region. And for that, I don't think that would be much difference between a Democratic or a Republican administrations in the future.
So when Obama said, Israel, we have your back, it wasn't a suspicious remark.
It wasn't a suspicious remark, and it's not that we have your back with a knife in our hand. Quite
no, just watching you.
Yeah, but one last thing I want to say that during Obama, there was somewhat defunding of the military and security budgets. And this is what Trump complained about, and he increased it by 50%. Biden continued with that trend, given all the threats that we have, China and Russia.
But, Doron, when you look at the U.S. armed forces, they are quite hollow. Not enough planes, not enough pilots, not enough Marines or soldiers who are willing to be retained because their families do not have good enough housing. And there is not much domestic support for any military mission, which could be considered military adventures. So it's not only the presidential political will. Presidents must read the tea leaves everywhere.
Well, first of all, we are military. We never have enough, as you know. We don't have enough airplanes, and we don't have enough this, and this. This is our constant situation. But on a serious note, I think this is really, you're right, this is an issue that the U.S. military, by the way, not only the U.S. military, also militaries around the world, things are different, family are behaving different, the culture is becoming a bit different. So this is for sure one of the issues that is there. I don't think that it is in such a point that we would see it changing the boots on the ground, let's say, in those areas, or in Israel or in some other areas. But this is for sure a concern that the U.S. military is dealing with. But I'd like also to refer to a point that was made by Danny before.
By the way, these boots on the ground are being produced in Gaza or Bangladesh.
Yeah, probably Bangladesh. But I think, when we talked about it before in depth on the U.S. strategy and what would happen in the Middle East, and are they going to leave this area and so on, I really don't think that they're going to leave this area. Because also the one or two interest that was described in their interest, which is China and Russia, are deeply involved in the Middle East. So there is a lot of things which, even if you look on the U.S. interest vis-a-vis China or Russia, look what is happening now with Iran. I mean, this is I mean, this is something for sure that the United States is looking at, the relations between Iran and Russia. So I think that still the Middle East, our area, CENTCOM for sure would be a significant partner for us and very high interest for the United States.
But everyone talks about deterrence. Deterrence means you are issuing threats. The other side...
That you're willing to...
Yes, the other side believes that you may do it. But if you don't have domestic support, there is no point in issuing empty threats.
Yeah.
Is there a difference between Republican and Democratic administrations in this regard? Iran mentioned the isolationist strain in Republican foreign policy.
Well, I think at least if we look at, let's look at the last 50 years. Toward Israel, maybe starting from 68 and going on from the United States point of view. I think that the support was there. If it was Republican, if it was Democrat, and then Reuven mentioned it before. I mean, everyone in Israel was sure that during the Obama administration, there would be no aid and so on. And then it was, the biggest aid ever were during the Obama administration. So I think the will is there. And the question is always, at the end of the day, what is the U.S. interest? And there is a big U.S. interest. Israel is a strategic ally in this area. So it changed. Of course, there are different between governments. But I think that in general, at least from my point of view, for the next coming year, if it would be Democrat administration or Republican administration, I see the relations with Israel very strong.
Iran,
Don't even ask because I can relate directly, and I want to
go ahead
because I have a very different view.
Yeah, of course, Iran.
That's why you're here.
Yeah, that's what you're here, to say something different.
I think it's not only wrong, it's dangerous to assume continuity on Israel-US relations, also on Israel foreign aid to Israel in the coming administration. Yes, here it does depend on whether or not it will be Democratic or Republican. If it will be a Republican administration, probably it will be more similar than not. But in a Democratic administration, even if it's a second Biden administration, I suspect there's going to be a world of difference. And it takes me back to the first part of the conversation. We went overall from a paradigm of the Cold War between the US and the USSR to the global war on terrorism and the multipolar world. And now we're shifting to a G2, China, US, new framework globally, with Russia playing a certain role we want to elaborate on. And I think everybody, including Israel, is going to be demanded by the US to choose sides, something that Israel has consciously refrained from doing. And the Ukraine case, again, was a very good case in point. Israel refrained from doing what the US was expecting of it and to align with the US and the Democratic camp. And by the way, this was true about the Netanyahu government and the so-called change government. So strategically, Israel, unfortunately from my perspective, I think it's totally wrong, chooses to continue this dangerous game of walking a tightrope between the US and China. And I think in the Democratic administration, that's not going to fly anymore. And if Israel will continue to choose to play this kind of game, it will also suffer not only in the overall kind of temperature of the relations, the strategic alliance and all that, but also in terms of the foreign aid.
Danny, when you were in Washington in the second part of the first decade of this century, this millennium, you have gone from the first Bush term to the second one. Obviously, his father, George H.W. Bush, only had one term. So we don't know what would have happened had Bush Sr. stayed in office, had Jim Baker, who left the State Department to his deputy Larry Eagleburry, gone back and mediated in the Middle East. Perhaps everything would have been different. We would have seen the continuation of the Madrid process rather than the start of the Oslo process. But the point is, in a second term, when a president cannot be reelected for a third term, he is perhaps freer to do what he refrained from doing during the first term. Both Biden and Trump, if he comes back, will have this freedom. Do you think there will be any difference between these two regarding this point?
Well, this is true. And Amir, you know it very well, that the second presidential term is mostly a foreign policy term. The first term is to consolidate domestic issues, and we know that Americans, by and large, vote on domestic issues, on the economy. It's the economy stupid, and only on the second term they really can have the wherewithal and the freedom of mind and politics to concentrate on world affairs. And by the way,
and to nominate Supreme Court justices if the other side allows them.
Absolutely. And near as I can tell, most leaders, by the way, prefer to dwell and to deal with foreign affairs than domestics. You know, here they can have this grand mastery of strategic leadership. They don't have all this minutia of the economy and other things. So, but second term, also most presidents are very much concerned with their legacy. So it's also their legacy that they want to leave behind. And here, probably Biden and Trump are totally different in what they want to leave behind. So this could be quite different. One thing that we did not discuss here is Iran, because the Iranian issue also may be dealt differently under Biden or Trump. And in that respect, I think that, and here I would like to differ with something that was said here. I think that the the U.S.-Israeli partnership alliance will continue because of the new Chinese-Iranian pact. So even it's a Democrat or Republican, they will continue to support. They will continue with the defense aid, the military cooperation, but
with Iran, the question is also who is going to be the next supreme leader when Khamenei finally meets his creator. Now, regarding the domestic electoral base of both Biden and Trump, there are two questions. One has to do with American Jewry. From your contacts with visitors or when you travel to the United States, do you see any change in the levers of power American Jews will hold in a second Biden administration as distinct from a second Trump one? And the question doesn't have to do a lot with personnel in the administration because obviously they have American interests at heart. It doesn't matter whether a particular secretary is Jewish or not. The question has to do with organized Jewish groups, so-called lobbies, whether they have different powers in a Republican or in a Trump administration, to be more exact, than in a Biden one.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I'm the right one to answer this question because all my family is in Hollywood and the West Coast. And so for me, American Jewry are Democrat and Trump is crazy. But in general, also, I think it's a sense.
This is not necessarily the point of view of this show. It's just your family in California.
My family and friends on the West Coast in the United States. So really, I don't know if I'm the right person to analyze the American Jewry on this. And also here, the people that I speak, I don't see a big difference throughout the years. And in general, in the United States, the politics are so polarized, like we have here, that it's really troubling to see. So it's troubling here, and it's very troubling to see that from afar. So it depends who you are and who you vote for always, right? And who your family always voted for. And according to that, all your worldviews go. So if it has to do with abortions, right? If it's gun control, Biden, Trump, right? It's black and white, and your whole worldview is shaped by that. And it's troubling because reality doesn't work like that. It also means that having a discussion like this is very sensitive even for me, because how could I relate to each and every subject? It depends who you are. It depends what you think. I also see a big difference in the rhetoric between rhetoric and what is done, because you see Trump, before his elections, he said America first, and what did we think? He's pulling back, right? No need even, we don't even need an army, right? We're focusing inside jobs, and that's it. Yet, the moment after he comes into office, what do we have? Reality and the world and the challenges and China and Russia and all that. So even here, I don't see a big difference now when they will come into office. Doesn't matter who they are, they have to address it. What will be the difference? Personality. Because Trump has his style, has his rhetoric. He thinks, for instance, he claims that he'll solve the Ukrainian issue in 24 hours, right? I'll bring him to the table, it'll be over. Is he a magician?
It's very easy. We'll come to Putin and we'll tell him, Ukraine is yours. That's it.
Right. Now, is he a magician? No, which leads me to another problem that we have, and that is also here and also there, this political culture of making leaders into wizards. Like, we have Bibi here and his supporters, and there we have Trump supporters. Like, nobody's a wizard.
We had
nobody's a magician.
Those who said that in Gaza Strip, it's a matter of 24 hours.
Which means also that my recommendation to the American people is, someone was a president, you were the president, now let somebody else. Which leads to the age issue, by the way. Let someone else, let a younger generation. Whatever you did, you did. Okay, time for someone else. You're not a magician. Trump is not going to save
this rule does not apply to our discussions, and especially not to anchors.
That's full disclosure.
Yes. Iran, the Trump base, evangelical, right-wing, conspiracy theorists, people who believe that the last time around the election was rigged, was stolen from Trump.
Good Christians, conservatives, yes.
What does that mean should he come back to foreign policy and national security?
Well, in my mind, I have this very visible, clear frame that cuts across domains, also cuts across domestic and foreign policy domains, and follows more or less the same lines that were so typical of the first Trump administration. And it connects the dots. It connects the dots both in terms of foreign and domestic policy in the US, and also, again, across the files, including the Israeli file. And again, here I have a slightly different view from some of my colleagues here. I think this polarization that Reuven was justifiably talking about will have a tremendous impact on Israel-US relations. And the base that you alluded to is going to have a tremendous impact on that, just like it had in the first Trump administration. So, and always when I was in the foreign ministry, we were always looking at those pairs of the Israeli leader and the American leader. Netanyahu, Obama, we all knew it's going to be a catastrophe. Netanyahu, Trump, we all knew it's going to be much more of an harmonized situation. So who's to say who's going to be prime minister in Israel 6, 12, 24 months from now? But if it's still Netanyahu, obviously a Netanyahu-Biden administration is not going to be harmony in any way, shape, or form. And Netanyahu-Trump administration, actually that's, I think, much more of a question mark that people might tend to assume. But as far as...
Because Trump still resents Netanyahu's early
and because
endorsement of Biden.
From Trump's perspective, Netanyahu did not provide the goods that he was supposed to.
But more importantly, he will not need the evangelical vote again because he won't have another term.
Yeah,
so
that's
Trump
also
will
true.
do a lot of things on his own.
But there will be a midterm election in 2026.
But he couldn't care less. He couldn't care less. It's Trump. It's all about himself.
Yes, but if he doesn't have the majority in Congress, it will impair his policy. He still would
but
need
he
it.
will concentrate on foreign policy.
Go ahead, Aaron.
But the hard base, the hard right that will support a Trump administration, and a Trump administration will have to listen to, at least as far as Israel is concerned, obviously will not change. And this whole notion of annexation of the territories, the enshrining of Jerusalem, the anti-Arab sentiments, all of that is going to persist and will have an influence on Trump.
Finally, 2 questions for the 4 of you. Please be brief. Should Israel, having heard what Iran just said and all of you, should Israel try to meddle in the next presidential election, or will it backfire? Reuven.
No. Your turn.
No.
Well, I agree, no.
Aaron.
Again,
Could you elaborate on the negative?
Yes, again, my frame is also here very strong. We are already entering into, and we're very deep into an era where everything splits between the pro-democracy camp and the pro-authoritarian camp. It's true about Israeli domestic politics, it's true about American domestic politics, and it's true about global affairs. So if Israel sees itself as a democracy, and unfortunately this government is not in that line, but if Israel will have a real democratic administration, Israel will have an interest that the US will have a similar pro-democracy American administration. It doesn't mean that we have an influence, but it certainly means that we can and should raise our voice, much like we raised our voices against fascist, anti-democratic, authoritarian regimes in Europe. And we didn't think it was forbidden for us to meddle because we speak on behalf of the world Jewry, we speak in terms of the lessons, the historical lessons of the Holocaust and all of that. Yes, it's also true about the future American administration.
So the three no's were briefer than your own reply. We don't have enough time for the last question, which was going to be, you said foreseeable future. What's after the foreseeable? For the time being...
Black hole.
Black holes, sure. Thank you, Eran Etzion, Doron Gavish, Danny Ayalon, and Reuven Ben Shalom. This has been Powers in Play on TV7 News Israel. Shalom from Jerusalem.